So good evening and welcome to the Lab Miami. I'm Danny LaFuente. I'm one of the co-founders and the COO here at the Lab Miami. We are a co-working space that serves as a campus for social and tech innovation here in Miami, aiming to serve South Florida and as a gateway to Latin America. We like to think of ourselves as a community of change makers and creatives that learn, act, and build together. We're thrilled to be here again collaborating with the American Society and Council of the Americas on this talk that will be discussing the state of VC and entrepreneurship in Latin America. So on that note, I'd like to pass the mic to Nancy Anderson, Senior Director of the Miami chapter of the American Society and Council of the Americas, to open discussion.
Thank you, Danny, and to your partners and the entire team at Lab Miami for hosting us here this evening. Once again, we're delighted to be in this fabulous entrepreneurial creative space. The American Society, Council of the Americas, and Lab Miami are also collaborating with LAVCA for this evening's program on the state of venture capital and entrepreneurship in Latin America in 2013. And I'd like to thank you all for attending for what I'm sure will be a dynamic discussion with some very distinguished expert panelists. We have Kate Ambrose, Andres Moreno, Boris Irdmis, Manny Medina, and Juan Pablo Capello with us today. Welcome and thank you for participating. As many of you know, the American Society and the Council of the Americas continually strive to address the key issues and challenges that affect Latin America and the Caribbean. And our commitment and our strength lies in the ability to unite public, private, and the nonprofit sectors together affect positive change in the development and growth of our hemisphere. In particular, entrepreneurship and innovation have long been the cornerstone of our vision for development, both economic and social, in the region, and tonight's program follows on the heels of our annual Latin American Cities Conference in Mexico, where Boris and I just returned from yesterday, that had a very important panel on this topic with folks from Google, Softex, Wyra, and Endeavor. As well, we also had our Latin American Cities Conference in Rio last week that was entirely dedicated to this subject. And I invite you to go to our website, www.as-coa.org, so you can actually see some of the experts and panels from those conferences. Tonight's conference forum is being webcast live. And so I'd like to thank Telefonica, who is our global webcast provider, for their support in disseminating these discussions around the world, and thank all of those that are chiming in right now via webcast. Well, obviously I'm biased, but there's probably no better city, in my opinion, to have this discussion on entrepreneurship and innovation, because Miami is truly well positioned to not only be, to be the critical hub for the Americas, all of the Americas. So let me thank our Miami program sponsors, Bunge, Chevron, Cisco, HBO Latin America, and Kroll Advisory Solutions for all their support in making tonight's program possible. We're indeed thrilled to be able to collaborate with other community leaders in creating an ecosystem for Miami, inclusive of the Technology Foundation of the Americas and the Knight Foundation. So with that, let me turn it over to Juan Pablo Capello, who is going to be our expert moderator for tonight's program. Many of you know Juan Pablo. He's the co-founder of Idea.me, the co-founder of Cyber Energy, which is a energy company in Chile, was also previously a partner in Patagon.com. So thank you, Juan Pablo.
So don't hold that against me.
Over to you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Nancy and Madeline. I see I think it's great. It's standing room only. There are some seats, so if any of you wanted to not stand, you're welcome to start making your way to the front. Now would be a good time, especially here to the right. Anyway, I'd like to thank Nancy and Madeline for having the confidence to invite me to moderate. Again, I think I have one main qualification, is that I always finish on time. I'm sure this is going to be an amazing panel, but I promise I will not delay the cocktail hour. I hope all of you can stay with us for at least a little bit of time. We're going to start. We're going to be done at 8. And the cocktail party will ensue. When I first spoke to Nancy and Madeline about this panel, and we began sort of getting the panelists in place, I mean, I really realized how much Miami and in some ways Latin America has changed. I mean, this panel for the you who don't go to a lot of venture capital events in the region, any of the people here would literally be, keynote speakers at any conference. And in some ways, from my perspective, they're all doing something very, very important in the ecosystem to push forward venture in Latin America and actually to, sometimes save venture from itself. So just real quick in terms of an introduction, and then we'll let Kate go through a presentation, and the other panelists will provide some color and comments. So, Kate Ambrose, she's president of LAVCA, the Latin American Venture Capital Association. She's also very involved in the impact investing space in Latin America. She's an advisor to Nest Venture Fund and some other ventures. From my perspective, Kate's really helping push this ecosystem forward with data. I mean, the reality is, people like me sometimes wake up at night and, we're concerned like, oh my God, is it happening? Is this fluff? And Kate gives us sort of data that we can sort of point to and give credibility to the space. And I mean, I think some of the data we're going to see tonight is just incredibly interesting and eye-opening. We have next to Kate, Andres Moreno, who really is, sort of saving, the ecosystem with ideas and with an incredible company. I hate to admit it, but I realized today that I think I was almost in college when Andres was born, which I know we look the same age, so that's probably a shock to everyone. Yeah. But Andres' company, Open English, has raised to date $80+ million or so. I think soon a bit more. It's an incredible company that he founded while he was studying engineering at Simón Bolívar University at the University of Caracas 6-7 years ago. And it's really, as we're going to discuss tonight, it's really, from my perspective, hopefully a pioneering effort. Sometimes there's the expression in VC that the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land. I'm sure, Andres feels like he got a few arrows, at least, a few years ago, but it's really incredible, the company that Andres has built and the traction that it's gotten and the interest from investors it's gotten in the last few years. So we'll talk about that. Next to Andres, we have Boris Yilmaz, who, from my perspective, is helping to save and push this forward with very smart money and leadership. Boris is not only a good friend, he's the chairman of the Tres Mares Group, which is a innovation-driven holding company. He's the chairman or vice chairman of Yellow Pepper, which is a leading mobile payments company in the region. Interestingly enough, it's very, very successful and well-known in some non-traditional markets in the region. He's the vice chairman of Ideame, which is the leading, a double bottom line venture, a leading crowdfunding platform in the region and involved in a number of other projects, including one of the partners in the Lab Miami. We have Manny Medina, who is one of the few people in this market that almost needs no introduction. He asked me to let you all know that his shirt is salmon, it's not pink. Manny, a lot of people know Manny because he was the founder, chairman, and CEO of Terramark, which was sold last year, or was acquired 2 years ago by Verizon in a transaction that I think really changed the market down here and really made people realize the kinds of companies that could be created down here. Manny never being one to rest on his laurels. At least now, from my perspective, has 2 full-time jobs. One, he's the principal of Medina Capital, which is a fund focused on infrastructure technologies, doing investments both in Latin America as well as the United States. And he's also the leading person behind Emerge Americas, a conference which will be taking place with over 5,000 delegates focused on innovation. It'll be taking place here in Miami in May 2014. And one of the interesting things talking to Manny, which I think is very transformative for the ecosystem in Latin America, is he's willing to give local investors and early stage investors liquidity through his fund. His fund's willing to, step in, fill in that sort of middle growth capital space, but give people liquidity. So it's, just incredible to have, these panelists here tonight, and thank you all for joining. So I think with that, Kate can start working through her presentation, and we'll be interrupting and interjecting with questions and comments.
Great. Thanks a lot, Juan Pablo, for the introduction, and thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today. We also partner with Council of the Americas on an event in New York every year where LAVCA is based, and it tends to be more private equity focused. Fun to be here, and again, with such a great panelist of people from the entrepreneur and VC world. So I can almost see this from here. Very quickly on LAVCA, many of you may already be familiar with the organization. It's been around actually for a little over 10 years now. We started with grant funding from the Inter-American Development Bank, and our mission is to promote the development of private equity and venture capital investing in Latin America. So we are a nonprofit trade association representing over 150 investment firms active in Latin America, from big global asset management firms all the way down to small venture funds from Mexico to Argentina. And I would say as recently as 4 years ago, our membership was overwhelmingly dominated by private equity firms, growth equity. Still, the majority of the firms that are involved with us are firms doing investments in mid-market deals, buyouts in traditional sectors or infrastructure, real estate, consumer. But we've noticed over the course of the past 3 years or so a tremendous increase in the amount of venture activity in Latin America. And so we as an organization have become much more involved in that community. And frankly, in a lot of ways, it's been like starting from zero, because venture capital is quite different from private equity, and what our members in that space need is quite different. So it's just a bit of a look, both at some of the venture firms that we work with across the region, and also some of the partner firms in the accelerator and angel space. We are a resource not only for our members, but for the general public looking for information on private equity and venture capital in Latin America. So I recommend you use our website as a resource. We have a newsletter with over 4,000 subscribers globally. You can go in and type in your email address, and every deal that gets done in Latin America, we're tracking. So sometimes they're private or proprietary, can't be made public, but anything that can be made public, we are tracking and we're announcing on our website. We also have profiles of entrepreneurs and investors and fund managers. So now coming to some data. First on information technology deals, the growth of IT deals in thanks. Again, I can't see. Thanks very much. So IT deals in Latin America. So this is not necessarily, this is IT as a sector, not necessarily only venture deals, but I thought it was important to track this trend as well. Last year was a historic year for investments in Latin America, with almost $8 billion committed to deals and over 200 deals completed. An extraordinary number of those were actually in the IT sector. So that includes everything from startup activity around e-commerce, et cetera, all the way through to data storage, mobile platforms, outsourcing, which has become a fairly significant trend in Latin America, and IT infrastructure deals. So a whole range of investors are looking at information technology opportunities in Latin America, again, from venture to private equity. And we see IT deals going from 18 in 2008 all the way up to 104 in 2012.
Okay, and let me ask Andres, I think people would be interested who don't know Open English to hear a little bit about, I think your fundraising, I don't know when you raised, your initial capital, but I think it tends to follow this, that you've been in the market, fundraising, et cetera. Maybe you could talk about the history of Open English, and if it does feel that the market is, there's a lot more investor appetite today as opposed to a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this okay? Working great. So we went through all the different types of investors and investor rounds that you can have. I was coming out of Venezuela and going to Silicon Valley for the first time. As a first-time entrepreneur to raise money. So I think for investors in Silicon Valley 7 years ago, the whole concept of Venezuelans teaching English was not one that really clicked for them, as you can imagine. So, so it was difficult. There weren't that many Latin American companies out there that were trying to do what we were doing. And still, I think in Silicon Valley, when you talked about Hispanics, I think the image that came to mind in California was perhaps the kind of lower-income Mexican that was kind of trying to make his first-time kind of settlement in the U.S. and not this emerging economy that is Latin America, where broadband penetration, credit card penetration is making for some very exciting kind of tech-enabled and service models down there. So it was difficult, and actually it took us probably over a year to raise the first $400,000, and we did that from a number of investors and private angels. I would wake up every morning. I was sleeping on my buddy's couch in Menlo Park, and I would put on my one jacket, my one suit, and would go to investor breakfast like this, and would try to meet people like Kate and like Manny, and try to see if I could make friends real quick, and they could maybe over the next couple months give me $25,000 and invest in a convertible note in open English. So I got really good at that, and you can hold your wallets if you're close to me.
Sleeping on your friend's couch or
absolutely. So and all this money was going to Venezuela to fund our team of developers down there. And so we went from that, and look, absolutely the market has changed. Now, whereas before we were maybe one of the only companies raising money in LATAM, I think to your point, we did take some initial arrows because nobody was thinking about this. Now it's not the case. I think we're now seeing how, particularly in Brazil and in some other countries like Chile and Argentina, there is a lot of investment going into kind of tech-enabled services and companies, and there's a lot, and most of the VCs that we're involved in that perhaps invested as a first-time investment in Latin America with Open English are now 2, 3, 4, 5 investments in after having done it with us for the first time. And it gets easier, I will say. It took us, our last round is $43 million. Did that in start to finish in 60 days, so a lot better than a year raising $400,000. and we just we're closing on our D round tomorrow, which is $65 million, and we did that in about 45 days. So it does. I think
45 days, not 4 to 5 days.
45 days. Thanks to the expeditious help of our general counsel.
We're good. We're back good. Let's put it that way. I want to raise the expectations.
Now, I will say though that I think there's kind of disproportionate capital going to, in my view, to kind of later stage deals in Latin America because for a couple of reasons, and I won't take too much time. I think one of the reasons is that investors like to be close to their investments when they're pre-revenue, right? And this has always been the case. And actually, for us being from Venezuela, we had to establish a company in the U.S. and not even be in Miami, but set up our first office on the West Coast because people wanted, when you're investing in a couple guys, a PowerPoint, and a dog, you want to know what they're doing every day. So I think that's one. And so now some VCs have moved to Latin America and are doing early stage investing, but that's still kind of a hurdle, I would say. And then the other is that I think there's not that many kind of growth stage opportunities in the region that have kind of a proven track record and in a kind of a revenue funnel that works. And so I think Open English has been a beneficiary of that, and there's a lot of kind of interest in capital going to that.
And what about that, Manny? I mean, you're with Medina Capital. You guys are sourcing opportunities both in the United States as well as in Latin America. Part of what Andres is saying is that there's sort of a concentration of capital, chasing relatively few companies. Is your sense when you look at Latin America and compare and contrast to what's going on in the United States, that the market, that there's a lot of capital chasing a few well-positioned companies down there?
I think my sense, first of all, is just kind of take a little bit of a step back. What Medina Capital does is we focus on investing in early growth companies that will typically either the round A or round B. We typically are the first institutional money that comes in after the angels have bootstrapped it, and many of the stories of Andres. But we limit ourselves to investing in the infrastructure space, from the network, cloud, a big emphasis on cybersecurity, big data, et cetera. So it's somewhat of a limited scope, but one of the things that the reason why we're in Miami, besides the fact that we love Miami, we could have established the fund anywhere else, is because I think we're the anti-Valley, right? I mean, what Andres is doing in Silicon Valley is very common, but I think valuations from a Silicon Valley point of view are a little bit frosty. I think in Latin America today, I mean a little bit frosty, and I'm being a little generous, right? Because I think they're very frosty. I think in Latin America, particularly the infrastructure space, that was never sexy. Typically what was sexy was the application that was going to resolve world hunger. Our space is boring, right? We're the plumbing. We're what makes everything else work, but we're not the ones that actually get the credit. So when you look at Latin America, we had operations in Brazil. We had a huge development team in Lima, a very big operation in Bogota, and in the Dominican Republic. One of the things that I found in Latin America was an incredible amount of talent, even in what we were doing. It was kind of in a half-joking kind of way. We would bring our teams from Lima, and we would kind of let them reside here for 6 months or so, and then only half kidding, I would say to the teams here, hey, now they're better than you, right? And so one of the things is that as we established a new business, one of the things that makes us different also is very, very few companies really, I find in the U.S., from a venture point of view and early growth or private equity, really are looking to invest in the infrastructure space, cyber, et cetera, because they're looking for something different. One of the highlights of my career was about a few weeks ago, I was asked to keynote a cybersecurity conference at Stanford. Having gone up and down Sand Hill Road many times and was looking for money myself in a different life, it was a really a high honor for me to be at Stanford addressing this very incredible crowd. One of the things, and every major venture fund was there in the audience, and it was really interesting because after they had a panel, and many of the venture funds, their key, even though I was speaking on cybersecurity, because my background in Latin America, Miami, et cetera, their biggest focus was Latin America. And I think I'm seeing a significant amount of new interest. But from a valuation point of view, the same company today in Bogota or in Chile or in Argentina, if you take the exact same companies and you domicile the company with the same product and same revenue stream, either in Silicon Valley, Dallas, Boston, or New York or Miami, the valuation is significantly higher here, right? So there's an arbitrage that we're looking to play in our business. We're very close to closing an investment on a Colombian company on the cyberspace. We're very impressed with them. We know their principles, and the whole idea is to bring their product here. So it's kind of an arbitrage in two different markets, right? You got great talent, you got great comfort, not exactly. Andres is lucky because he feels very comfortable doing business in the U.S. That is not the case for most of the entrepreneurs that we meet. They're great at what they're doing, but they don't have that comfort feeling. This is why Lab Miami and all this stuff is so good, right? Because it acclimatizes them. But we find that from a valuation point of view, there's still a significant difference. So we're going to be focusing a lot more on Latin America. The only difference is, Juan Pablo, is that we will not invest in Latin America unless there is a U.S. angle to it.
Okay.
You follow me? That basically is, we're looking for products that we can bring and do exactly what Andres is doing in domiciling them and creating a value in that basis.
And Boris, in terms of you as a smart money investor, then taking a leadership role in some of these companies where you act as chairman, et cetera. When you hear what Manny says, obviously you could invest here in the United States. You've chosen to make a significant number of investments in Latin America. Do you see the value proposition? And do you see, do you look at companies and really think about how they're going to address the U.S. market?
Absolutely.
Or is that something that's very important to you as an investor?
Absolutely, because I'm convinced we can bring from Latin America very fresh ideas, and we can use the Latin American experience and treat part of the American market using the experience from Latin America, and that not necessarily means you cater to the Hispanic market. Mm-hmm. It means you have a mindset because of your background, Latin America, and because of the Latin American experience, that you can certainly apply to the American market, not necessarily an ethnic or a specific segment of market. I'm convinced we can do that, and we have many good examples and a lot of background and knowledge we can translate or use in the American market with Latin American or American
And
companies. no problem.
specifically in any of the companies you're invested in, have you?
Well, I'm convinced, for instance, we're doing mobile payments, Yellow Pepper. Banking the bottom of the pyramid, which not necessarily is the bottom of the pyramid. As a banker told me, banking means more of a parable than an horizontal line. I'm convinced we can apply that knowledge to the American market. That 2 years ago, when you read the reports on mobile banking, everyone said that the U.S. doesn't need that because we have such internet penetration that there is no need really for mobile banking. And I didn't believe that. And I knew, as it happens in the States, that it would change overnight, which it has with Square and all the technology we're seeing now on the mobile, for the simple reason that everyone wants to use the one device, which is the smartphone. The smartphone has lowered its cost. Everyone's being able to access smartphones at a decent price. And again, that changed. So I'm a believer that we can apply the experience we have in Latin America into the American market in a fresh way and translate that knowledge into the American market by all means.
Sure. Another specific example to what Boris just said, the company that we're very close to closing the transaction is actually a cybersecurity company. They specialize in protecting banks from fraud, which is an epidemic. They have been fighting bank fraud in Latin America a lot longer than they've been fighting it here. And bank fraud, I tell you, this company is phenomenal. They've actually, their product set is way ahead of anything that we have found here. And we've been, that's the kind of thing that I think that's the kind of leverage that we can take a company from there and put it here. So coming to Boris.
That's very interesting.
I mean, I just got to chime in on this. It's interesting that Andres, had his back office doing the work in Venezuela. LAVCA's website and all of our tech platform is out of Argentina. We all know we can get much better, tech entrepreneurs and people building our database and hosting our website and the rest of it out of Argentina. So absolutely, there is an arbitrage, and I think it's the quality of the human capital. And usually when we think about entrepreneurship and startups and venture capital, it's about innovation, and there is a role for innovation there, but having very talented engineers and people in the technology, and a certain level of creativity as well. I mean, in the case of Argentina, you have people in the online gaming space, and I know they're competing with designers from Turkey and other parts of the world, but they're just recognized as being particularly high quality out of the Argentine
And these
market.
comments are also very, they're going against the grain of what sometimes the rub is. In Silicon Valley and other places against Latin America, saying, hey, too many of the projects are copycats.
Yeah.
Right? And then to hear, obviously, Andres' business model is not a copycat. And to hear investors like Manny and Boris say, no, we see an arbitrage opportunity, not only in terms of valuation, but in terms of technologies being developed, et cetera, that are better than the technologies that are available in other markets. That's very, inspiring. Because again, it's going against some of the chatter that you hear in the market.
Yeah, actually, that's kind of a nice segue. Oops, I think I'm still good. Do I have a slide there? That's, VC investments. So, this is kind of a segue into this topic of what types of startups are we talking about in Latin America? When we talk about the venture development and venture capital deals, you can see Brazil dominates overwhelmingly. So, the number of deals that we see happening on the VC side, Brazil is by far the largest market. It's where most of the international players have gone in. And frankly, the ecosystem just is more developed there. But Brazil is also the market in Latin America where investors are going in and targeting that market for consumption. So somebody who's generating a startup maybe in the e-commerce space they're focusing on the Brazilian market because there you have 200 million consumers. Internet penetration is expanding very quickly. Brazilians are well recognized, I'm sure this is seen here in Miami as well, as being very high consumers. In fact, there have been studies on this as sort of parallel them with the US market. And there's a great opportunity and this is often the copycat
There'd actually be more
case.
Brazilians here, but Sawgrass Mills is open late tonight, so they'll be arriving for the cocktail hour when they're, Oh, right, that's probably true,
But, they love to consume, and they are looking at buying over the internet. And that has been a lot of the investments that we've seen in Brazil in particular have been call it copycats, the Groupon of Brazil or the Zappos of Brazil. There are 3 of those, or the online baby retailer of Brazil. There are 3 of those, targeting consumption in the Brazilian market. Another model, if you're not in Brazil and you're not targeting the Brazilian market, you need to be thinking about a pan-regional play, because you really can't have, a startup targeting Colombia only or Peru only that's VC-backed. An entrepreneur might have that vision, but if you expect to get later stage investment and grow that company, it's probably going to be too small a market for you to really ultimately scale.
Let's ask Andres. I mean, you built the company, from what I understand. You've started in Venezuela and sort of proved your model there. I mean, what's been the evolution of your thinking in terms of other markets? Because you've gone into Brazil as a more developed company.
Sure. Yeah, we started in Venezuela, which was, by the way, very helpful. Although it's despite the instability and all the rest, having a place where it works and you have a proof of concept. And in our case, being a direct-to-consumer model, you have a conversion funnel that you put $100 in and 200 come out, not 99. All those things are important. And so that was critical to kind of getting the company off the ground and raising money. But then we started kind of trying to hack, right? What does it take to really build a pan-regional success story? I mean, to Kate's point, it's very difficult to raise money, especially as you get to the later stage rounds, if you don't have something that can either be at least for Brazil or at least for all of Spanish-speaking Latin America, but ideally for the entire region, because that's what gets the later stage investors that are going to put more money into your business very excited. And we found a number of success factors that worked for us. For example, pan-regional advertising. So we are a top 15 advertiser in Latin America on cable TV. And we do this because there are not that many companies out there, even the big ones like Procter & Gamble, that think about their marketing budgets on a regional basis. So even at Procter & Gamble, the Colgate guy is going to have his budget for Colombia, and there's going to be a guy in Mexico with his budget, and so there's not a lot of people going out and making pan-regional deals, and especially the bigger kind of local companies in any of these countries, like the beer companies, whatever, are doing just local deals, and we'll pay for any pair of eyeballs anywhere. If we can get a student in Guatemala, we can get them in Brazil, we can get them in Buenos Aires, and that has really helped us kind of do a lot of arbitrage with the media cost and be able to be very kind of present in all these different, we're kind of on almost all the cable channels and a lot of the open air channels all over the region with ads every hour on the hour, kind of building our brand, and that's one of them. I think the other one is making sure that your model isn't predicated on very local regulation, on hyper-local regulation. So in our case, although we're education, language learning is an unregulated space. You don't need a specific certification, so we can really advertise and sell and provide a certificate to kind of anyone, anywhere in the region. The other is trying to create service hubs around the best talent. So to Manny's point, we thought about, if we're going to set up an office with the best developers at the best cost in the region, where are they? We chose Argentina as well. We have a team of 70 developers down there. Where are the best service reps for Spanish-speaking Latin America? And we now have a center that does service and sales with 700 people in Bogota, which is working very well for us. We have 3 call centers down there. We have a center in Alphaville outside of Sao Paulo with 350 people doing service and sales for the Portuguese speakers. We have a finance center in Panama. We have our headquarters in Miami, where we find, and this is kind of Miami plug, but I think it's really important. Why Miami? Well, not only is it in the U.S., which is really important if you're raising a lot of capital, because investors aren't as happy or as excited to invest in a Venezuelan company or Colombia, and especially as the Ceros start to pile on. But you can be in Miami, you can work very well with the rest of the region, and you also have access to some of the best and most well-trained talent in the region. I think people try to knock Miami because they say that there's not enough developers here and it's not Silicon Valley. But if you're running a tech-enabled service, I think the value of that, the value of being local with technology, is less the case. We've been able to import from many other places around the country some of the best in class. Our CTO, for example, a CTO from Overstock.com. He took that company from 0 to $1.3 billion in revenue in 13 years, and he's with us. He brought over his team. You can have a team of core people here and then supplement that with tech talent all over the region. But what you find here that's very unique is, for example, our CMO, who did marketing and sales for Kaplan University, which is $2 billion a year in revenue, some of the best-in-class kind of conversion funnel, metric tracking type of thing, much better than anybody you could find in Latin America, but he's Guatemalan. So he brings that mix of kind of local Latin understanding of your consumer with a great understanding of the key metrics that you need to run a company. So I think if you are able to build your company pan-regionally, understanding kind of what in the region works for you, I think that's valuable.
How about, talking about marketing, how about Open English turning into Open Spanish for the U.S. or you're already here, so how about Open Spanish or even Open English for the Spanish-speaking market? Have you considered that?
Yeah, so we are, this is unannounced, the next round, and so we're making all these not to leave your question unanswered.
When you're a public company, you will not be able to do this, so enjoy it while you can.
Thanks, Sophie, I understand.
Just call your general counsel privately so he can pass it to us.
Is this okay? No, we are launching in the U.S. Hispanic markets. Actually, we did a large deal with the Cisneros Group, and we're going to be on Univision kind of day and night starting in 3 weeks. And so Open English will be available for the U.S. Hispanic market. That's very exciting. We're actually, this next round that we raised is to take this idea abroad. So we're going to be investing in setting up Turkey, Eastern Europe, and Russia. And we think that that's also exciting for us, is taking a concept that is not a copycat, something created in Latin America, and proving that you can actually create value and ideas in Latin America and take it abroad and build successful models and build a global brand from here. So we're excited about that. Spanish, not as much, because we are very good at not really at selling languages. We're really good at understanding emerging economies and the aspirational kind of that aspirational aspect of Latin America. I think it's, somebody learning English in Turkey has a lot more in common to somebody learning English in Bogota than somebody that wants to learn Spanish or a few words of Italian to kind of go on vacation if you're American, and know how to ask for the bathroom.
But then
it's not as aspirational.
You can take the concept worldwide, really. What your experience in Latin America translates not only to the States, but to any part of the world.
So English all over the world.
Which is
going to other
ground.
languages, we find that not as much because the aspirations and the reason to buy the product doesn't really translate. You're more, even Rosetta Stone, which is very strong here, titles or calls in their S1 filing, they call their students hobby linguists. Whereas for us, this is something that's a true tool that's going to transform your life, and that's what we're into selling.
Ken, Manny, when you hear that, I mean, that's so different than what you're accustomed to hearing about venture and the goals of companies in Latin America. The rub is, hey, these are copycats, and here, we're hearing world domination in terms of, language learning, et cetera. When you mentioned that you're very interested in sort of finding unique technologies and development teams in Latin America and sort of helping them grow into the U.S. market, is that strategy? Are you focused on sort of talent acquisition, or are you focused on helping those businesses grow organically throughout Latin America and into other markets like the U.S.?
I mean, it's a little bit of both. I mean, what we want to do is heavily influence the future of whatever company we're investing in as they expand. If that is talent, or if that is technology, product roadmap, market acquisition, that's what we would do. But one point that I want to add to what Andres is saying about some of the differences in Latin America, particularly from a pan-regional strategy, we had a pan-regional strategy in Europe. We had our headquarters were in Amsterdam, and we had operations throughout Europe. And the last data center, by the way, that we opened, Andres, was in Istanbul. So to your Turkey point.
Yep.
So anyways, but one of the things that was really, really difficult in Europe to establish a pan-regional strategy was regulatory environment. It was a nightmare, particularly in the cloud. As we launched our cloud, the requirements of you not being able to move these workloads and the data from region to region was extremely constraining and difficult. You don't have that issue in Latin America. Our entire strategy, our data center coincidentally is also headquartered in Alphaville, and our data center in Brazil, and eventually was going to be a pan-regional strategy where we could move all these workloads. It doesn't matter what the capacity. You cannot do that in Europe, right? The same thing in cyber. In cybersecurity, the regulatory issues of handling personal data and the regulatory issues regarding that are immense. In Latin America, you don't have that. So we like companies that have that ability to be able to expand on a pan-regional basis, including the U.S., right? That's that makes
Yeah,
sense?
and I mean, it's interesting because one of Andres' sort of keys to success was avoiding the local regulatory environment. Say yellow pepper, which you mentioned, is in a highly regulated space, or
And that's why, for instance, we realized that the Mexican market was open for us at a certain point because regulation was in place. It is a banking product that needs to be regulated, but you need to have the regulator, the central bank, be in line and accept that the product itself, the banking.
But do you all, because yellow pepper operates in how many countries in the region?
Nine
countries?
yes, including Haiti
And is the analysis in terms of the countries that you go into very regulatory driven?
It has to be, because otherwise you cannot deploy the product. For instance, being Brazil a very attractive market, the regulation for us it's not still in place where we want it. So we decided to open Mexico and deploy the product in Mexico before Brazil. And it has to do with the regulation being, friendly towards the product. Absolutely.
Kate, I don't.
Yeah, no, it's
You're
interesting because what we're going to here is talking again a lot about businesses that are not necessarily focused only on domestic consumption, but rather on pan-regional platforms or even international markets as well. Really exciting about where you're going with Open English. I'll see if I'm allowed to make that public or not. But just in terms of, sorry, next slide. When we started seeing this dramatic move in Latin America was when we started seeing the Silicon Valley firms go into the region. So again, as recently as 5 years ago, when you talked about venture capital in Latin America, you really had to qualify what you were talking. There was not VC as we understand it, sort of in the US context, Silicon Valley or Israel, with tech startups. It was really smaller amounts of money going into traditional businesses. And what happened was Excel, in particular, Tiger Global, Flybridge, one of the earlier investors in Open English, decided that Brazil was, a very interesting market because, again, they saw there the opportunity to do something that they had previously done in China. Again, this is sort of the copycat model, go in and target consumers in the Brazilian market and launch typically e-commerce or consumption-focused investment. But I think, critical part of what is happening in Latin America today, and we see it on this panel, is the interaction of U.S. investors and U.S. entrepreneurs and Latin American investors and Latin American entrepreneurs. The development of this ecosystem is a reflection of, actually, it's not that great of a time to be particularly an entrepreneur in Europe. Amazing how many Spaniards and Portuguese, are going to Latin America, and actually how many people from, young people from the U.S. are going to Brazil to join startup teams and be part of sort of the environment down there. It's a very dynamic time for Latin America. There's a lot of growth and wealth creation happening, and the entrepreneurs and the venture investors have really, followed. So this is the first move of the U.S. firms going in, and then this slide sort of reflects what's been going on the ground in the region. So actually some of these programs are in place prior to the last few years, FINEP in Brazil, BNDES, Development Bank, but there's been an enormous amount of support from governments in Latin America. And when I talk about the region, I'm primarily referring to Brazil, Mexico, Chile, and Colombia as the 4 markets where you really see active support from governments and development banks to put money into the entrepreneurial ecosystem funds. So Startup Chile has been one of the better recognized programs. If you're not aware of it, they're offering entrepreneurs $40,000 to go spend 6 months in Chile, and they have a work visa. But what's really been phenomenally successful about Startup Chile is its ability to attract talented entrepreneurs from around the world. It's actually not for Chileans. When they first launched it, the Chileans were sort of upset because there weren't very many opportunities for Chilean entrepreneurs, and it was mostly people coming from even, again, Europe, the US, and around Latin America. But what we've seen over the last few years since Startup Chile has been in place is that the entrepreneurs that participate in that program spend 6 months in Chile, and then they hop to Brazil to get supported by an accelerator such as 21212, as we see on here, or some of the other ones, or to Argentina with the partners at NXTP Labs, another accelerator. So there's been a combination of government support and accelerators on the ground, from the local community, and then again, the international VCs and Americans and Europeans heading to participate in that whole startup ecosystem.
Yeah, let me ask Boris a question as an active angel investor. Is your sense that the entrepreneurs in Latin America, because of these kinds of programs, be it Startup Chile or the incubators, NXTP, 212, some of the others, that they're closing the gap between how prepared they are relative to their peers in Silicon Valley and other markets?
I think they are, and I believe the reason is very simple, which is social networks. And that is what Startup Chile is all about. There've been a lot of criticism about why would you give someone $40,000, just stay 6 months, no strings attached, you can go.
I'm one of the people who criticizes
Well,
that, by the way. As a Chilean
there was a lot
taxpayer.
of criticism, but President Piñera was very clever in realizing that using two of the most disruptive ideas nowadays, which is social network and technology, would make these people the multiplier agents or the tellers, the story economic tellers of Chile, of what Chile is doing in terms of business. So not only do they tell the Chilean story, but in general what's happening, why I think the gap is simply closing, is because you have social networks nowadays, and that worldwide has made every entrepreneur be aware of what is happening. So you cannot say I didn't know, where can I learn about it. You have all the information at hand, and that is simply, for me, that is magic.
And what do you agree with that, Manny? I mean, you're a successful entrepreneur, and now you're sourcing deals both in the United States and in Latin America. Do you find that the entrepreneurs in Latin America are sort of at the level where they need to be, or do you no?
No, I don't find that at all. I find that we are spending significant amount of more time in due diligence. I find their back offices are not up to par. I find that their legal system is not up to par. I know everybody bootstraps, but when you bootstrap in the U.S. Or in Europe, for that matter, there's a certain amount of discipline that you utilize, and I think it's taught to you early on. In Latin America, it's more of a little bit of a wild, wild west when it comes to due diligence, when it comes to having an organized data room. They don't exist. I'm exaggerating.
Yeah, no.
The point that I'm making is that's one of the challenges, right? That basically you're trying to come up with a methodology to be able to make sure that you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's before, and it's just more challenging than here. But that's okay. We're willing to go through because of everything else that I said.
Because of the valuation, because of...
I agree with Manny. My point is that we're coming fast. I think we could do better in Latin America.
Yeah.
And yes, we still need, the entrepreneur needs to understand how to align the interest, what the investor is expecting. That is for sure. But we have come a long way. When you realize that Latin America had some very basic needs, like legislation, there wasn't access to capital. Most of the entrepreneurs had access to family and friends, but then when you needed the serious capital, traditionally it really wasn't there. So we have to learn how to attract that talent, the capital, the due diligence. We have to. There's a lot of work ahead, but.
No, I agree, Boris, but for example, and I agree 100%, it's come a long ways. It just has a long ways to go.
Absolutely.
When Andres began, raising his $400,000, I assure you that his level of sophistication, when he put on his only suit and tie and he talked about this business plan, was significantly higher than the same Andres that was running around, Caracas or somewhere else at the time, right? He forces you, just from an environment point of view.
The thing is that social networks are really new, and that has accelerated the process. It is the beauty of it.
It's a question for Andres. I mean, I know you mentor a lot of emerging, budding entrepreneurs. Is your sense that these startup programs like Startup Chile or Impulsa in Colombia, accelerators, incubators like 212, that they're really raising the bar, or do you think they're just helping entrepreneurs in Latin America sort of speak better, VC?
Yeah, it's I think all those programs have a lot of value. There haven't been that many success stories to come out of it, and if you talk to, for example, Kazakh, one of our investors, that's one of the two co-founders of Mercado Libre, and they raised $100 million to invest in early-stage Latin American companies. You would think that their portfolio would be full of Startup Chile companies, right? Because they're kind of better educated entrepreneurs, et cetera. And they're not. It's interesting. Most of what is getting funded has a strong U.S. influence, to Manny's point. So it's usually a U.S. entrepreneur coming together with a Latin American entrepreneur. It's usually the result of some incubator in the U.S. or someone who was an entrepreneur in residence that went down to Latin America and identified an opportunity there. And those are more the concepts that are getting funded. I also think, and I think part of the issue is the length of the runway. Learning to raise capital takes a long time, and it's not an easy thing to do. And and not just raising money, but raising money the right way. In our case, we got offered venture money very early on. Decided not to take it, fortunately, because we didn't really know what we were doing. So we probably would have lost the company early on. So we decided to instead do a convertible note round, which is a little bit complex for kind of if you've never raised money, but it's basically you're raising debt and offering angel investors a discount on whatever the value of that round A is going to be, and trusting that round A investor is going to be serious and is going to negotiate good terms for the angels coming in. It's a vehicle that's not really available in Latin America, right? But we learned that because we were, going around Silicon Valley, and Wilson Sonsini, which is, one of the best law firms there, actually gave us a $50,000, loan to work with us for free, and they gave us money to be a part of this. So there's a lot of things that are set up there. But in Latin America, that runway of $40,000 for Startup Chile, I don't think it gets you very far. I think you can go through $40,000 like this, and you garner a lot of excitement. People quit their jobs, but they won't necessarily end up with a company that's fundable by the venture guy that's looking to invest that $500,000, million, $5 million. So I think there needs to be more support. I think where the ladder, the fundraising ladder, in my view, breaks down is not at the growth stage. It's not if you're raising $50 million, not if you're around B raising 10 or raising 5. I think where it breaks down is not if you have $50,000. That's available from friends and family. It's that kind of 50, 100 to $1 million. I think that's where a lot of people are getting caught up.
I tell you, I disagree with you on something, Andres. At the 5 to 10 million, we've looked at companies that have been funded by VCs, by Latin American VCs, and the level of requirements and sophistication that a Latin American VC requires of a Latin American company is totally different than if you were going to be funded by Andreessen or Accel or Triton or somebody here, right? Even at that level, it's just different. It's just, and I think that, like to Boris' point, they've come a long way. They just have a long way to go, right?
And what about that dichotomy,
and
Kate?
just to make one comment, I second that. But just to give one example, we were funded early on in our round A by two wealthy Salvadorian families that were tech investors. But but the level to which we had our kind of processes and our financials put together to accept that, which was it was $5 million, it was sizable. When Flybridge came in with $1 million to level out and fill the $6 million round A, it took us 3 months to get everything cleaned up, and we went through because there was just stuff that had not gotten done the way it should have. And I think one of the most useful things was getting that U.S. investor in there.
So that's the only point that I'm making.
It was critical.
In our case, for instance,
about that
with the Yellow
dichotomy?
Pepper, we just closed around with Latin Idea, a Mexican fund, and it was very impressive, the due diligence they made. Very, very much to what you would expect on the
do have
US
a
But it's a
market.
Mexican partner and American partner, that not for anything, one of our, I mean, this is the thing, it's the intersection of the international, again, so many of these teams, and Hernan, Casaca, who's on our board of directors, Argentine, but who's been in, the U.S. back and forth. Again, it's that intersection of, it would be very rare, I think, for anybody here to either get involved in a startup or back something that is, a couple of Brazilians or a couple of Colombians who've never left their home market, who haven't had interaction with or partners with I mean, maybe on the pure tech side, because again, there are very high quality engineers in Colombia. This is not to denigrate anything in Latin America, but the really, where you start to see, that entrepreneurial opportunity is when you see the intersection of international people coming in and local entrepreneurs. And just to put this whole conversation in context around where Latin America is and expectations and exits, I mean, this is a huge issue today because people tend to take the press runs away with the stories, and we as an association try to be measured about it. I think it is extraordinary the change in the region over the course of the last 5 years. I've been following Latin America my whole career, and again, we saw certain things happening on the private equity side, but the young people, the 19, 20, 22-year-olds, the level of sort of sophistication among the entrepreneurs, and just the idea that I want to be an entrepreneur, not I want to go work for my dad's company, for a bank, for the government, that there really has been a dramatic shift in the course of the last several years, and that comes with successful case studies, of which we need a lot more. But it takes, decades to build a venture ecosystem. You see this around the world with, where the government's going to throw X million dollars to create some hub somewhere, and all of a sudden they expect in 5 or 10 years to be the next, everyone wants to be the next Silicon Valley or next Israel. It never happens that way. You can't replicate what happened in Silicon Valley. But you do need government support. And just using the Chile, the Startup Chile program as an example, it's based, I'm going to get in trouble. I don't think I want to say this.
No, no one's paying. You're just basically, this is a conversation
We work
just
very
amongst
closely with them,
ourselves.
actually. It's been a phenomenal campaign for Chile. And I think there are people inside it recognize that this was in many ways a marketing campaign. Sure. The term Silicon Valley, was coined first.
Right.
I know that the very esteemed Silicon Valley.
Mexico has a Silicon Valley.
And then I mentioned that, it's been everywhere. And so that, all of a sudden Chile is on the map. And what they have done is created a cultural shift in the mindset of Chileans and people all around Latin America, and they have generated actually an amazing number of entrepreneurs. There's hundreds that have already been through that program. How many of them are going to succeed and build, a sustainable company out of that? We'll see. But they've spread all around the rest of Latin America. And then the really critical issue now is, again, this issue of exits and what's coming next. So tangible success, again, very exciting to see what Open English has achieved.
Yeah, Andres, don't feel any pressure. The whole market is riding on a few exits like yours.
Yeah.
And who mentioned that was a few days ago at the council of the forum, Marcos Santos from Guaira, Mexico. When asked about why don't we have enough or more startups in the case of the Mexican ecosystem, he said that we need new heroes. We in the case of Mexico, we need heroes like the ones we have in Silicon Valley. So we need those people to inspire the rest of the younger generations and the present generations to do more startups. So you are under scrutiny, but yes,
Be a hero.
we need people
Be a
like
hero,
this.
Andres.
Absolutely.
Put that on your
No,
to-do
no,
list. Just be a hero.
But that's the thing. We need those role models to inspire the entrepreneurs.
And actually, this segues to a question I wanted to ask Manny, which is, I've actually been surprised in Latin America. Back, I think it was 4 years ago, I helped Three Melons, Mario Suarez Patan, who was an entrepreneur in Argentina. He had a video game development company, and he sold his company to Playdom Disney, and I don't think it's a public number, but it was a very nice sale, but it wasn't, hundreds of millions of dollars kinds of sales. And I expected that there'd be a sort of steady stream of exits of Latin American companies, in that maybe $8 to $25 million range, where, the Groupons of this world, companies that Twitter, Facebook, whatever, would be looking to, do acquisition talent hires, maybe trying to, buy a technology, or, just basically try to roll their business model through Latin America very quickly. And we've seen, and Kate, tell me if the data is not this way, I think we've seen relatively few of those deals. I thought, a deal like Three Melons or the Atacama Labs deal in Chile last year, which was another video game deal, that kind of valuation. I thought, you'd just see lots and lots of those deals creating a sort of generation of, not maybe the mega heroes, but a generation of successful entrepreneurs with exits, where the investors in those deals would, have some liquidity, et cetera, and you'd start creating this virtuous cycle. I haven't seen that, and I'm just wondering, Manny, why you think that is.
Well, look, I think obviously, I'm stating the obvious. You got two type of buyers, right? Financial and strategic. I think in my business, in the infrastructure space, cybersecurity, cloud, big data, storage, et cetera, there have been $20 billion worth of acquisitions in this type of companies in the last 24 months in the U.S.
How many billions?
$20 billion.
Okay, 20
worth of
billion.
acquisitions of these companies between 20 and $300 million, right?
Yeah.
Which has created a bunch of exits. I'm just putting this into perspective.
Yeah.
So in the Latin American market, you don't have that strategic appetite. They actually are concerned, which is what we're playing. We want to, I don't want to use the wrong word, but we want to kind of clean these companies up to make them more appealable, right, to this voracious appetite of companies that are here. The financial buyers, frankly, like Kate was saying, this is all new for them, and they're not really, there's not a lot of financial buyers that are coming in here and saying, I want to take this company out, I want to do the same private equity. There's some. I'm not saying that there's some. So there just hasn't been that amount of capital available down there because there's been a lot of opportunities here, and in Europe. So that's my observation.
And have you felt some of, Kate, we're clearly not going to get through all your slides.
There's two that are at the end I
Yeah.
really want to jump to, though, because I don't want to miss it.
Okay, why don't we get to those, and then we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Okay. So we just published the 2013 LAVCA Scorecard today. This is a publication that's been around for, I don't know, it's like the 7th or 8th edition. I think it's actually the 8th edition. And this measures the regulatory and investment environment in 12 countries in Latin America on a bunch of indicators to see, which countries rank best. And you can see here the ranking has not changed dramatically over the years. Chile comes out first, and actually Chile does very well, among other things, because they score positively on things like intellectual property rights and perceived corruption and judicial transparency, where they really stand out in the region. But the interesting development for the 2013 scorecard is one of the other indicators is entrepreneurship. We actually added that indicator about 4 years ago. Very tough to measure. There are a lot of different international benchmarks that we use from the World Bank and the rest of it, and there's kind of a combination of quantitative data on how many companies have been created, how many of those companies have been sustained, and the ease of doing business from the World Bank, and then interviews with entrepreneurs and people in country to get that kind of qualitative input as well. And so the interesting development for 2013 are that both Colombia and Mexico jumped 1 point on the entrepreneurship indicator. So Brazil and Argentina, a place where the country really stands out, where they're quite weak on a number of the other indicators. And Chile had already been strong there, but Colombia and Mexico jumped into that group. I think that, I found that to be very interesting. Again, so much of the initial interest we've seen from VC investors and in the startup community has been around Brazil. And to see countries like Mexico and Colombia get a push in this direction, I think, is a sign that there's a lot going on in other parts of the market. So I would add, I know that Manny is acquiring a company in Colombia coming from a local VC firm in that market, which is, so you are again a financial advisor, and you're obviously working with Yellow Pepper in Mexico. So I would just be curious to see, we've talked a lot about the entrepreneurship ecosystem and the rest of it, but let me put it the opposite way. What are the challenges you still see in places like Mexico and Colombia? What has changed, if anything, in recent years for entrepreneurs and the quality of entrepreneurs? And what are the challenges that are still out there?
I'm not going to speak about Mexico. I'll let Boris develop, but I will speak a lot about Colombia. Because we've been in Colombia for a long time, and I think that Colombia, the first thing that is happening is the mindset. You were earlier, when you were saying, I want to go be an entrepreneur, and startup. I think that has already happened. I think you got tremendous talent, and I think you have the government very much in favor and behind the whole idea. You have VCs, money that has actually been, for the last 3 or 4 years, substantially more available. You have a legal framework that is actually improving and helping. We feel very secure, with having that. So I think all of that in Colombia, I am very high in Colombia because they're going the right route. And over the last 5 years, we've seen a night and day difference in everything that I just mentioned. In Mexico, Boris,
Oh, and I agree. Why, for instance, what puts Chile ahead? Chile traditionally has had a legal frame that it's a very solid legal frame. You know what the rules are. The investor feel confident that you can work with that legal frame. Even though Chile is very far away, still you have a very solid legal frame. I think challenge, for instance, in the case of Mexico, we need to reinforce a more friendly and entrepreneurial legal framework, that you're able to work, that sometimes, why, perhaps, if you're an American investor, why invest in Latin America if I have the largest market in the world, which is the US, and as opposed to invest in Latin America, if I don't have perhaps the assurance that the legal frame is going to be there, if I run in trouble, I will be able to sort it out through the legal frame. So we still, and not Mexico, in general Latin America, we need to reinforce the legal frame. We need to give the assurance to the investor that you can do business, that it's friendly, that you're welcome, and that you can solve any issues with or being backed by a legal frame. We need to work in that in general.
But what about, Andres, you guys started in Venezuela, obviously not a market that, most US VCs are super interested in charging into, right?
No one.
How important is, Kate's sort of, chart in terms of sort of business or venture friendliness, the venture ecosystem in the country. How important is that for your investors? I know you guys are set up as a Delaware corporation, so they're not so worried about the rule of law in terms of, investing into a holding company that's here. What's been that sort of conversation or the evolution of the thinking?
Yeah, I think it's very important. We would have not been able to get to where we are by trying to be a Latin American company. We're an American company. We're based here, and we have now. It gets more complex than for most American companies, and that adds an extra layer of work. We have how many entities, JP? 13 at this point. I can't keep track, but you have to kind of set it up in the right way so that you can do business in the most efficient way in each of these different markets, while still kind of be an American company and the money flow into this. And when you get into intellectual property, there's a kind of a whole new set of entities and rules that apply there. And so it gets more complex, and closing 5 days after the month is over becomes harder than if you were just based in the U.S. and you have a number of other challenges. But it's the way you have to play the game so that you can build a successful business that operates in LATAM, but is really an American business.
So, okay, one more slide, and we're going to take two
Well,
questions.
that was pretty, those were the two most important. We had a couple of other slides from the scorecard. This one, I'm sorry, I'm not able to see it from here, is on minority shareholder rights, where we see Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico, and then there's another one on intellectual property rights. Actually does significantly worse. So that's kind of an interesting question. How important is something like the protection of intellectual property rights in markets down there? It's not relevant for you because you're here, and I guess, or is that an issue when you're in markets down there that you might be ripped off, and has that been an issue at any point in time, or?
There will always be competition. I think for us, money is a weapon, and you can go and really build a brand, and that's I think your best barrier to entry.
but I think also, even if you're looking at transferring, because we're going through this now, even if you're looking at transferring the IP to the US, you've got to make sure the foundation was right. So if you have weak IP laws in the country where the IP originated, you just got to be, you just got to make sure, because this has been a very, very big issue as you transfer that IP to the US.
Yeah, and to Manny, to your earlier point, one of the things where we had to spend an extra amount of time when the first U.S. investor came in was in making sure that was all buttoned up coming from Venezuela, because they have very weak intellectual property rights, and the U.S. investors wanted to make sure that even if it was a U.S. company, if everything was here, that anything developed down there wasn't a risk.
Of course.
Perfect. I think we're going to take two questions, maybe three if the answers are short, and then we'll move to the cocktail hour. Questions? Yes? We have a microphone.
A few years ago, in private equity in Latin America, the first generation of funds learned the hard way that they couldn't use the same model as in the U.S., right? They needed control, exits were not as easy. And, I think private equity industry has changed a lot, and there are a lot of funds going to Latin America. These are the first generation of VC funds. So what are the variables and what is different, if it is at all, that they're doing in Latin America?
That's an excellent question. Actually, I was going to mention this before in the conversation. What we've seen is a real difference among some of the more local and traditional venture firms doing the first rounds of investments. Again, some of the panelists touched on this, where say a high net worth individual or family has an entrepreneur that approaches them and is looking for funding, and they say, well, I'm going to take 55% of your company, and here's, X number of dollars. There really wasn't a culture of understanding what it means to be a venture investor, which means to take, a much smaller stake, and then you're not buying something, you're cultivating something, and you're mentoring an entrepreneur, and you're giving them the money that they need each step of the way to ultimately build something and grow it to be successful. So actually, about 3 years ago, we started hearing all of these stories that when the international VCs went into the market, there was sort of an arbitrage between entrepreneurs. Some entrepreneurs complained that, that the local VCs would complain that the international investors coming in were driving up the valuations of startups. So there was a concern that U.S. firms were willing to overpay because they had a lot more money to spend, and compared to, as a point made earlier on the panel, it was just it was going to be, a cheaper acquisition if they were investing in the U.S. But I think really the lessons have been, again, this intersection of international investors going in and now often co-investing. So many of the deals that we see now, and actually Open English as well, is a combination of, firms on the ground in the region, co-investing with international firms, and frankly, learning how venture capital is done.
Another question? Sure, in the back.
Hello. I was wondering, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering how do you say venture capital in Spanish?
Capital de riesgo.
No. Eso tiene un sentido muy negativo. Se había indicado.
Are you rebranding it?
No, we rebranded like 40. No, we actually went through this whole.
No, you say it, venture
Capital
capital.
emprendedor. That's right.
That's how you say it,
That's
venture
right.
capital.
That's right. Era capital riesgo, luego era capital emprendedor, and then we said it's not working, and we said it's just going to be venture capital. And actually,
really?
Yeah,
This
absolutely.
is like,
And
there's a
that's
lot
often, if it's translated literally down there, it's often capital riesgo, but that has a connotation that is not so great.
But we are keeping Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
The Silicon Valley's okay. Well, I think with that, we'll move to the cocktail hour. So thank you very much. First off to the council.